In studying history, one finds moments in time, interesting stories, that pierce the veil that separates us from history, and reveals the diverse tapestry of events that is the past. These include tales of unique individuals under extraordinary circumstances. These stories will show that the past is much more complex, much more disturbing, and much more incredible than one can ever imagine. The serial killer's 175-year-old head in a jar. Considered by many to be Portugal's first serial killer, Diogo Alves was born in Galicia in 1810 and traveled to Lisbon as a young child to work as a servant in the affluent homes of the capital city. It wasn't long before young Alves realized that a life of crime was better for turning a profit, and in 1836, he had himself transferred to work in a home located on the Aqueduto das Águas Livres. Despite the fact that those traveling across the aqueduct were humble farmers returning home, Alves would lie in wait for them at nightfall, when he would rob them of their earnings. Afterward, Alves would throw them over the edge of the 213-foot-tall structure, sending them falling to their deaths. Between 1836 and 1839, he repeated this process some 70 times. Local police initially attributed the deaths to copycat suicides, which led to a temporary closure of the bridge. Alves then formed a group of bandits, before they were caught while killing 4 people inside the home of a local doctor, and Alves was arrested and sentenced to death by hanging. But it's what happened next that makes this one of history's most interesting stories. Scientists at the time wanted to study Alves' head, to determine the origin of his murderous nature. For this reason, they had his head removed from his dead body and preserved in a jar for study, where it has remained ever since. This severed head now sits in the University of Lisbon's Faculty of Medicine, where students can experience this chilling reminder of a horrifying man. The Vicious Crimes of Lobster Boy. Grady Stiles Jr., who would become known as Lobster Boy, was born in Pittsburgh in 1937 as the latest in a lineage of lobster men carnival sideshows who inherited the congenital deformity ectrodactyly, which fuses their fingers together into lobster claws. Stiles' case was pretty severe. In addition to his hands, he also experienced ectrodactyly in his feet, and therefore could not walk. For most of his life, he primarily used a wheelchair, but also learned to use his upper body to pull himself across the floor with impressive strength. Limited by these deformities, Stiles grew up confined within the carnival world, and so it wasn't surprising that as a young man he fell in love with another carnival worker named Maria Teresa, a young woman who had run away to join the circus as a teenager. The couple soon married and had 2 children, but things took a turn for the worse when Stiles started drinking and, combined with his overpowering upper body strength, he became abusive toward his wife and children. When Stiles' teenage daughter, Donna, fell in love with a young man that he didn't approve of, he murdered his daughter's fiancé in cold blood on the eve of the wedding. At his trial, he admitted his act with no remorse whatsoever, but pointed out that he couldn't possibly be imprisoned because no jail could properly accommodate his disability, and was let off with 15 years probation and allowed to return home. Though they had divorced during the trial, for reasons that no one, either in the Stiles family or outside of it, has been able to understand, his first wife agreed to remarry him in 1989. When she returned, the beatings became more severe, and few years after they remarried, she paid her 17-year-old neighbor, Chris Wang, $1,500 to shoot and kill him, bringing one of history's most incredible stories to an end. Not one of them denied that they had killed Stiles. During the trial, his wife spoke at length of his abusive history. "My husband was going to kill my family," she told the court. "I believe that from the bottom of my heart." The woman who survived the Titanic, and 2 other shipwrecks. Depending on your perspective, Violet Jessup was either the luckiest or unluckiest woman to ever live. Either way, she certainly has one of the most interesting stories you'll ever read. Jessup was a stewardess on ocean liners who began her career aboard the Orinoco in 1908 at age 21. She started with the White Star Line when she went aboard the HMS Olympic, one of 3 Olympic-class cruisers created by the company, in 1910. A year later, while Jessup was still working aboard the ship, it collided with the British warship the HMS Hawke while the two were passing through a narrow strait. Though both vessels were damaged by the encounter, it did not completely destroy either ship and there were no fatalities. While the Olympic was being repaired, Violet was employed aboard another White Star Line ship, and the sister vessel to the Olympic, the RMS Titanic. Jessup was on board when the Titanic struck an iceberg and sank, but was able to find a lifeboat, and survived. Despite these 2 sea accidents she had been a part of, Jessup was undeterred, and during World War I, she served as a Red Cross stewardess aboard the HMHS Britannic. It had been converted into a hospital ship and was transporting injured soldiers to the United Kingdom, when they hit a German mine in the Aegean Sea and sank. While escaping the sinking ship on a lifeboat, Jessup and many other passengers were almost sucked into the ship's propeller blades, but narrowly escaped, cementing her reputation as Miss Unsinkable. She would later recount her harrowing story in Titanic Survivor, the newly discovered memoirs of Violet Jessup, who survived both the Titanic and Britannic disasters. The Human Zoo Exhibit. Ota Benga was a Mbuti pygmy tribesman born in the Ituri forest of the Congo in 1883. Benga married young and fathered 2 children, but his dreams of living a normal life were shattered when, sometime in the 1890s, Belgian colonial troops came across his village and killed his entire family while he was out hunting. Without a family or tribe, Benga was lost and had no place in the society he had grown up in. Surprisingly, at this point, some of Benga's most trying times were still ahead of him. Shortly after the death of his family, Benga was captured by slave traders and put to work on an industrial farm. It was there, in 1904, that Benga was discovered by, of all people, an American businessman named Samuel Werner with racist beliefs about evolution. He thought that Benga, with his short stature, dark skin, and sharp teeth, filed as part of a cultural ritual, was a missing link between humans and our evolutionary ancestors. He then purchased Benga for a bag of salt and a bolt of cloth. Werner's group promptly brought Benga to St. Louis, where he was the hit of the 1904 World's Fair. Following the exhibition, Benga briefly returned to Africa, where he remarried, but returned to the U.S. after his wife died from a snake bite. He was later placed in the ape enclosure at the Bronx Zoo, displayed as part of the New York Anthropological Society's exhibit on human evolution. Local black clergy were appalled by the exhibit and demanded Benga's release. They successfully lobbied the governor to force the zoo to shut down the display. Benga then briefly lived in Virginia working at a tobacco plant. In 1914, he decided to return to Africa, but when World War I broke out, he was unable to do so. On March 20, 1916, depressed at the thought of not being able to return home, Ota Benga shot himself in the heart and died, bringing an end to one of history's most heartbreaking yet also interesting stories. Pamela Newkirk would later document the life of Ota Benga in the award-winning spectacle, The Astonishing Life of Ota Benga. The only Catholic priest ever executed in U.S. history. Hans Schmidt was an unusual child. He was born in the German town of Aschaffenburg in 1881, and had an eerie childhood habit of spending his afternoon watching the cows and pigs be processed through the local slaughterhouse. He was also entranced by Roman Catholic rituals, and played priest with a homemade altar. These 2 childhood passions would eventually converge in an unsettling way. A 25-year-old Schmidt was ordained in Germany in 1904, but by 1912 found himself at St. Boniface Church on the east side of Manhattan. But he wasn't the only recent addition to St. Boniface at the time. A young Austrian housekeeper named Anna Allmüller had recently been hired to keep shop. Schmidt and Allmüller then began having an affair. On February 26, 1913, Schmidt married Al Muller in a secret ceremony that he performed himself. However, later that year, Al Muller told Schmidt that she was pregnant, and he knew that his days as a priest would be over if word got out that a purportedly celibate Catholic priest had married and impregnated a woman. On September 2, Schmidt slashed Al Muller's throat with a 12-inch butcher's knife in a Manhattan apartment that he had rented for her. He then sawed off her head with a hacksaw and sliced her body in half, finally dumping her remains in the Hudson River. When the body washed up days later, police traced the remains back to Schmidt. Within minutes, he confessed to the marriage and murder of Al Muller, claiming "I loved her. Sacrifices should be consummated in blood." The jury convicted Schmidt of first-degree murder and sentenced him to death by electric chair. Schmidt was electrocuted to death on February 18, 1916. To this day, and this is what truly makes his tale one of history's most interesting stories, Schmidt is the only priest to ever be executed in the United States.